This is where the U.S. and allied forces clashed with the Iraqis in the past day or two. Clearly, the Iraqi government, Baghdad, knew what was happening. They knew that these POWs were taken, and they knew they were going to be put on Iraqi television, and that is exactly what happened. By the way, as we understand, the video is now no longer being run on Al Jazeera, but we've been monitoring a number of other Arab television networks, and that video has been running on other Arab television networks. Now, another Iraqi propaganda move, which didn't go quite well today. This happened in the center of Baghdad. We saw scenes of Iraqis shooting into the Tigris River, burning the high grass along the river, running up and down along the river. The line was that the Iraqi claim that an Allied plane had been shot down over Baghdad, and 2 Allied pilots had ejected from that plane and had fallen into the river. Well, U.S. Central Command and others in the Defense Department there in Washington absolutely flatly denying that there was a plane shot down or that pilots had ejected. Right now, the scene in Baghdad relatively calm, although there have been air raid sirens, but clearly Baghdad and other cities in Iraq once again in the sights of Allied forces. There were 6 or 7 blasts heard late afternoon, some centered on the western side of the city. Also in the early part of the morning today, there were other blasts, day and night bombing raids being conducted, continuing to be conducted in Baghdad and other cities around Iraq. That's the latest from our vantage point here in Amman. Jordan, back to you, Greg.
Greg, we just got the 2-minute warning about 30 seconds ago, so we're about a minute and a half away from the CENTCOM briefing in Doha, Qatar, which we're going to be taking live, so I may have to interrupt you. But Jordan, of course, is home to a great many refugees. In fact, roughly half their population are Palestinian refugees. They are opposed to the war. Have there been protests there that you've seen in Jordan?
In fact, Greg, in the last couple of days, we've seen the Arab street erupt here. We just got back from a press conference with the Prime Minister of Jordan, and he told us that in the past couple of days there have been 55 different demonstrations, protests throughout the country of Jordan. We saw today, in fact, police clashing with protesters, tear gas shot at the protesters, stones thrown. We saw that yesterday as well. Jordan is walking a tightrope. The Prime Minister said, we are walking a tightrope with our policy concerning Iraq. They have in the past been strong trading partners with Iraq. Right now, however, they are tacitly and in some ways openly supporting the American policy, and that is angering the population here, sentiment running against the war. So yes, we have been seeing unrest. Yes, we've been seeing major efforts by the government to tamp that down, Greg.
Let me interrupt you because here is the CENTCOM briefing.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant General John Abizaid, Deputy Commander of Combined Forces Command. With me today are Major General Peter Wall, Chief of Staff of the United Kingdom's National Contingent, and Brigadier General Vince Brooks, Deputy Operations Officer for U.S. Central Command. We're now in the 4th day of operations in Iraq and continue to make good progress on the ground, in the air and at sea, and in accordance with our military campaign plan. Operations in the West continue to put pressure on Iraqi units. We continue to hit command and control centers and logistics nodes in that area as well. In the North, we're reinforcing our presence and targeting elements of regime support units and the Republican Guard. In and around Baghdad, we continue our air and special operations activities with good success. In the South, our air units continue the campaign towards Baghdad and continue to operate in and around the area in support of our ground forces. Combat operations have met with resistance in a number of locations, the most notable of which is in the vicinity of An-Nasiriyah. United States Marines defeated an enemy attack there while sustaining a number of killed and wounded in the sharpest engagement of the war thus far. Also in the vicinity of An-Nasiriyah, United States Army supply convoy was ambushed by irregular Iraqi forces. A number of American service members were wounded in that action, and as a result of that action, 12 U.S. service members are reported missing. Subsequently, Iraqi regime officials displayed captured Americans on state television. This is a clear violation of the Geneva Convention. Earlier this morning, an American Patriot battery is thought to have downed a British Tornado in an accident that is both tragic and under investigation. The crew are, at this point, listed as missing. In the various combat actions and accidents that have taken the lives of many of our comrades in this campaign, all of us mourn them. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the families of those killed, wounded, and missing. Despite our losses, the enemy remains in grave danger, and our victory is certain.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by adding my personal condolences to the families and friends of the UK service personnel and the United States service personnel who've lost their lives since the start of this campaign. Our thoughts should be with them and those who are still missing, including coalition military personnel and those from the media. Even in peacetime, the business that we are in is inherently dangerous. In war, the dangers and uncertainties for our people face on a minute-by-minute basis are infinitely greater. However, this is what they've trained for. Our forces are professional, highly motivated, and committed to this operation. We don't know the full circumstances of the incident earlier today, but there is clear evidence to suggest that a US Patriot missile battery shot down an RAF Tornado GR4. A detailed investigation is underway, so we must not rush to judge. We need to establish exactly how this happened so we can take steps to minimize the risks in the future. But we have checked our current procedures and we are satisfied. We must also recognize that we're working at the edge of the operational envelope. The risks will never be eradicated, but we're always working to ensure they are minimized. We mustn't forget that the Patriot missile system is deployed to provide an umbrella for the coalition. So far, the system has shot down 4 missiles that Iraq has launched indiscriminately at our forces and the people of Kuwait. Were it not for Patriot, many more lives could have been lost. In this coalition, we have to share responsibility for each other's lives, and we each benefit from the capabilities that we each provide. We must remain focused on our objectives and, notwithstanding these tragic events, get on with the mission. UK forces have made an outstanding contribution to the progress that the coalition has made so far. As you will have seen, our operations are fully integrated and we're fighting side by side with the forces of the United States and Australia. The remarkable TV coverage over the last few days has demonstrated how 3 Commando Brigade and the 15 Marine Expeditionary Unit from the United States are still engaged in operations to mop up the last remnants of resistance on the Al-Faw Peninsula, and most importantly, in Qasr. The majority of the resistance we have faced so far comes from Saddam's Special Security Organization and the Saddam Fedayeen. These are men who know that they will have no role in the building of a new Iraq, and they have no future. While this is ongoing, fleet clearance diving teams are in the port area to make safe demolitions, and some of our mine countermeasure vessels are engaged in the critical process of clearing the sea mine threat in the Khor Al Abdullah waterway. Once this has been done, humanitarian aid can begin to flow. In the south, elements of 7 Armoured Brigade and 16 Air Assault Brigade are consolidating their position around Basra and have taken many hundreds of prisoners. A camp to house them is currently being constructed near Qasr, where they will be provided with food and water, and their medical needs will be catered for. As a soldier, I do not see these men as cowards. They have simply taken the very sensible decision that Saddam's regime is just not worth fighting for. We take our responsibilities under the Geneva Conventions very seriously, and having seen the disgusting TV images which appear to show the mistreatment of US prisoners, the same cannot be said for Saddam's regime. In the Rumaila oil fields, our explosive ordnance disposal teams are continuing the difficult and dangerous task of clearing the munitions and booby traps that the regime left behind. It is a testament to the effectiveness of the coalition forces that the regime failed to destroy more than a handful of oil wells and that an environmental and economic disaster has been averted. The RAF has been involved in operations around the clock since the campaign began, flying over 100 sorties per day. And our tankers and AWACS have played a key role in supporting the coalition's air effort. Tornado GR4s and Harrier GR7s, accompanied by Tornado F3s, have attacked targets ranging from critical command and control facilities to surface missile sites. The new generation of precision-guided weapons has greatly increased the RAF's ability to attack a wide variety of targets in all weathers. The first operational use of the new standoff weapon system, called Storm Shadow, has also been an outstanding success. It's both extremely accurate and exceptionally potent. UK forces will continue to make a significant contribution to all aspects of coalition operations across the whole theatre until we achieve our objectives. We will not rest until this regime and the threat it poses to the world through weapons of mass destruction is eradicated.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I want to give you a brief update on the operations. You've already heard many of the pieces, and I will highlight a few additional points as we go through. Today was a tough day of fighting for the coalition, but we continue our attack to remove the regime and to destroy the forces supporting it. Our forces continue to fight bravely and with determination. The terrain gained today includes Qasr, the approaches to Basra, the seizure of the Talil airfield, and the bridges at An-Naziriyah, all of which are shown on the map. What I have not shown is just how deeply and where the ground attack has penetrated. In advance of the land component, air attacks concentrated on the destruction of Republican Guard forces outside of Baghdad. At the conclusion of one of those air attacks, the Patriot firing incident occurred. And General Franks has ordered an investigation into this incident. The coalition encountered pockets of determined resistance by irregular Iraqi forces who in some cases fought in civilian clothes or in modified commercial vehicles. These encounters are most intense in the area north of An-Naziriyah, where coalition forces did sustain casualties. You've heard of the 6-vehicle convoy that encountered an ambush near An-Naziriyah, which resulted in the destruction of their vehicles and the wounding of 4 soldiers who were later medically evacuated as a unit from the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force passed through that area sometime later. There were 12 soldiers from the ambush convoy that could not be accounted for. We believe them to be in the custody of the irregular forces that conducted the ambush, and their status is not known. Finally, as coalition forces continued their attack north of An-Naziriyah, they encountered a force showing every sign of surrender. As our forces moved to receive this surrender in an honorable way, they were attacked and sustained casualties. With the hard fighting of the last 24 hours, the coalition does continue its attack. Our forces remain determined and even more resolved to accomplish our mission. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be happy to take some questions. Yes, sir.
General, Jeff Mead of Sky News. We may all have found those images distasteful, but what do you say to those in Iraq and perhaps in parts of the wider Muslim world who may hail the first capture of American servicemen and women and be encouraged by it to believe that the coalition can be beaten?
Well, it's very important to understand that as we progress in our campaign throughout Iraq, in the vast majority of places we have been welcomed. And I think that the people of Iraq who see those images will not be heartened, they'll not be encouraged, they'll just regard it as one more brutality inflicted upon people by a regime that has inflicted countless brutalities upon their people. The same goes for the rest of the Muslim world. No one has killed more Muslims than Saddam Hussein. So the sympathies for that regime and for this brutal dictator are not served by the humiliation of our people. Yes, sir.
General Tom Fenton of CBS News. Why have there not been such mass surrenders as you had in 1991 so far? Is it having to do with the fact that the Army wasn't pounded for weeks in advance?
I think the main reason that there haven't been a lot of mass surrenders on the same scale as in 1991 is that the Iraqi forces really were trapped in Kuwait. They were far away from home. They had nowhere to melt back to. Here in the areas that we've been encountering regular Iraqi forces, by far the majority of units have just melted away. We find a substantial amount of abandoned equipment on the field, and in the regular Army there is clearly very, very little will to fight. True, we've captured 2,000 prisoners thus far, but the units that we've expected to find in various locations and put up resistance really haven't done so. Yes, sir.
Yes, Alan Cypress from the Washington Post. Could you tell us more about the incident in which U.S. forces were approaching Iraqis who appeared to be surrendering? Was it a case that they were pretending to surrender, or they mistakenly believed to surrender? And also, we understand about 15 U.S. soldiers were killed in that incident. Could you please tell us more?
Well, I think there were a number of incidents today in the sector. As you know, there's an awful lot of stuff that has transpired, an awful lot of combat actions. I think you're probably referring to the action that the Marines had in and around Nasiriyah. I would not want to give numbers of casualties because, as all of you know, you're all seasoned folks and have reported on these sorts of things before. The first reports are always misleading. Suffice it to say that in the Marine action in Nasiriyah, it was a combination of irregular forces and regular forces. As a matter of fact, one of the few times that we've seen regular forces fight. And it's difficult for me to characterize it right now as whether or not they could have been special Republican Guard units that were moved down into that area, or irregular forces of other types, or regular Army. So I wouldn't want to characterize the force that did the fighting in Nasiriyah. Suffice it to say that it was a very sharp engagement, but the Marines were successful. They defeated the enemy. First reports indicated they destroyed 8 tanks, some anti-aircraft batteries that were in the region, and also some artillery, along with a number of infantry.
Is this the incident in which the Iraqis were thought to be surrendering and were not?
There were several incidents reported today in which there were types of behavior that I can only describe as ruses that were perpetrated by the enemy. In one incident, a flag of surrender was displayed, and it was followed up by artillery fire. In another incident, there were troops dressed in civilian clothes that appeared to welcome the forces and then ambush them. So there are a number of incidents occurring to the rear of the main combat forces. None of these incidents, however, I would characterize as posing a danger to the overall success of the mission or the thrust of the main forces towards Baghdad. Right here, sir.
Ahmed Samir, Abu Dhabi Television. We have been seeing reports of U.S. soldiers killed, missing, and captured, and the stiff resistance of Iraqi in many cities which you claimed before taking full control, such as Nasiriyah and Qasr. Are you facing a new Vietnam in Iraq, or you are victims of over self-confidence?
War is a very, very risky business for everybody. We're not overconfident about this endeavor. We are confident about the ultimate outcome of this endeavor. We are soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines in a joint team that is very powerful and one of the most integrated and well-trained forces ever put together. There won't be anything that stops us on the battlefield. Yes, sir.
You often acknowledge that this has been a tough day of resistance from the Iraqi side. Is that within your expectations? Can you comment on that?
A tough day of resistance is all relative, of course. It's the toughest day of resistance that we've had thus far, but it's also a day in which we have continued the attack in almost every area. We understand that there may be other tough days ahead of us, but the outcome is still certain. We have to understand that in many conflicts in our nation's history and in the history of our coalition partners, there have been days much, much worse than this by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, sir.
Have we seen any evidence of weapons of mass destruction yet?
We are continuing to look for weapons of mass destruction. We have received reports from various prisoners that have given us leads. Suffice it to say that we continue to look, but so far we haven't found any conclusive evidence. We are confident that we will find it. Yes, sir.
The Jerusalem Post is reporting, George Stephanopoulos, ABC News. Jerusalem Post is reporting that 30 Iraqi military, along with a general, have surrendered to the 3rd Infantry Division around Al-Najaf at what appears to be a biochemical weapons complex. Can you say anything about that? Can you confirm it? And is that the report you were referring to?
I will not confirm that report. We have a Iraqi general officer, 2 Iraqi general officers that we have taken prisoner, and they are providing us with information. Yes, sir.
Audio Revolt, ABC News. Sir, before the war started, there were reports that if a war were to start, that Saddam Hussein would force some of his Iraqi civilians to serve as human shields, force them to serve as human shields. In the encounters that American forces and other coalition forces have had thus far.
Very large explosions, so a bit of everything tonight so far.
David, we are now listening to correspondent David Chater, who's with our sister network Sky News. We are taking a brief break from the CENTCOM briefing to listen to some of David Chater's reporting.
We should add that explosions were heard 23 minutes ago over Baghdad on the outskirts of the town. Let's listen.
Targeting strategic targets in Baghdad this evening. We know that the Iraqi forces have been setting fire to oil-filled trenches around the city of Baghdad to try to confuse those laser-guided missiles. So the images that you're looking at could be a combination of both that and indeed the Allied forces striking military targets. We can't really clarify that for you at this stage, but we can tell you that 1,600 British and 6,000 US sorties have been flown against Baghdad since the war began, hitting military and leadership targets. Also, sites were told by the Allied forces suspected of weapons of mass destruction. Monitoring the situation in Baghdad for you and returning as soon as we have.
All right, we are going to go back to the CENTCOM briefing, at least the audio portion of the CENTCOM briefing, where Lieutenant General John Abizaid is answering questions, but we're going to keep the pictures of Baghdad up. So we're essentially going to be doing 2 things at once. Let's go back and listen to the audio portion of the CENTCOM briefing in Doha, Qatar.
Of our troops, and I can assure you, and I think all of the embedded media out there would also attest to the fact that morale is about as high as it can be. I mean, morale is high, confidence is high, and the troops are extremely prepared and ready for this operation. Yes, sir.
Mike Tobin with Fox News. When you have the Iraqis apparently surrendering and then turning on the U.S. forces, does that change at all the manner in which the U.S. or coalition forces will deal with the surrendering Iraqis?
We, of course, will be much more cautious in the way that we view the battlefield as a result of some of these incidents. But that will not in any way take away from the way that we treat the battlefield, and I think that it is clear that there is no force like this coalition that has honored and respected the rights and the safety of civilians as has this coalition. So we will continue to do everything possible to safeguard civilians. As a matter of fact, I think it's very interesting when you think about it that the coalition forces attacking into Iraq spend a greater amount of time worrying about the safety of civilians on the battlefield than their own regime. Yes, sir.
News. The growing anti-war movement in the Arab world, do you think it will force the Arab governments to go back on commitments they may have given you to support your efforts against the regime of Saddam Hussein?
Well, I really wouldn't want to make any statement that might mark me as a State Department official. I'm a soldier and I do my best, but I would say, as a person who has studied the Arab world and loves the Arab world, that the majority of educated Arabs that I talk to know that Saddam Hussein has been a plague on the Arab world and on his own people, and they welcome his removal. Yes, sir.
Tommy Chair with CNN, taking you back from the State Department back to the Pentagon. Do you feel you have sufficient force in the coalition currently to continue this operation, or will more forces be called up?
We certainly have sufficient force. There's probably not been a more powerful military force ever put together on the planet of the Earth than this one. Yes, sir.
John Broder with the New York Times. To follow up on an earlier question regarding human shields, do you have evidence that the Iraqis have put explosives in potentially important military targets in and around Baghdad, or put civilians in those targets, and has that inhibited targeting certain facilities that might be good targets?
We've received reports that certain bridges that link some of the eastern neighborhoods to western Baghdad are prepared for demolition, and we don't believe that this is a military move. We believe it's directed against the local population. We've also received reports of explosives being placed up against certain buildings in inhabited areas in Shia neighborhoods in Baghdad, and we regard this as a very bad sign and a typical move by Saddam.
Does it cause you to inhibit your targeting of those?
Our targeting, of course, does not target the population of Iraq. We do everything in our power to keep our targeting as precision-based as it can be, always knowing that there is room for problems that could take place, but we're very precise in our targeting, and we're certainly not influenced by any targeting that he would make against his own people.
I know you're reluctant to discuss numbers at this stage, but can you help us put some sort of shape where I think several of us in the room are hearing from various embedded reporters, 15 Marines perhaps in one incident. I've heard some numbers of Army casualties in a separate incident, and we have the 12 missing from the supply convoy. Can you just give us some sense of how many skirmishes we're talking about and rough scope of numbers of casualties in each?
It's very difficult for me to do. Before I came over here, I did my best to try to find out the numbers. I can tell you for a fact that we are definitely missing 12 Army soldiers that are unaccounted for, some of whom I believe ended up on Baghdad television. We have a number of killed in the action in Al-Nasiriyah with the Marines. I believe that number will remain less than 10. And a number of wounded that is probably, I really wouldn't want to speculate on the number of wounded, but there are wounded, some of whom have been returned to duty, others that have been evacuated from the battlefield. And as usual, the Marines handled themselves in the greatest and best traditions of that Marine Corps. Sir.
There was a British general today who said that you guys might be in Baghdad by late Monday or early Tuesday. Does that seem wildly optimistic now in view of the resistance you're getting or not?
I wouldn't want to speculate on the timetable, and I think that we are on track. We'll arrive in the vicinity of Baghdad soon, and I prefer to leave it at that. Yes, sir.
Jeff Schaefer, Associated Press Television News. There were pictures today on television out of Baghdad
showing Iraqis looking and shooting at the water, looking for an alleged American pilot or pilots who had jettisoned from the plane, and they were looking in the water. So far, can you say if, in fact, any American planes have been shot down, any pilots, American pilots parachuted out of any of these planes? Can you comment on that?
No planes have been shot down. No pilots have parachuted. But I did note that the Iraqis were searching for what they thought to be a downed American pilot, and you can see by their actions shooting into the water that their search and rescue techniques leave a lot to be desired. Yes, ma'am.
Can you give us a sense now that if there are in fact civilians being used and explosives being placed, what does this tell you about who is in control? Are these the actions of someone close to Saddam, or are these the actions of lesser forces who are improvising?
Well, I believe these are probably the actions of desperate people that are trying to save a doomed regime. We have not seen on the battlefield a single coherent military move. These moves are dangerous to the troops in the field, but they're not dangerous to the success of the mission. Yes, sir.
Al Jazeera satellite channel. The engagements with the Fedayeen Saddam and the Special Security Forces at Qasr, first of all, have you encountered such forces in other locations, in other engagements, and is it usual to find them so far south? And is there any other reason for their being there other than waiting for you guys? Thank you.
Well, certainly I believe that it's clear that certain elements of the Special Security Organization and perhaps the Special Republican Guard infiltrated forward in an effort to conduct these types of raids as our troops came through the area. I do not regard the forces that conducted these operations as regular Army forces by any stretch of the imagination. You're from Al Jazeera Television. I'm very disappointed that you would portray those pictures of our servicemen. I saw that, and I would ask others not to do that. Yes, sir.
Michael Wolff, New York Magazine. And as a follow-up to what you just said, can you envision a situation in which you would come to regard Al Jazeera as hostile media?
No, I don't regard any media as hostile media. I regard...
Even if they continue to show pictures like that, even if you continue to have that kind of exchange every night?
I regard the showing of those pictures as absolutely unacceptable.
So you do... There might be then a situation in which you would say that's Al Jazeera is unacceptable.
I said what I said, and that's about all I'll say about it. Yes, sir, in the back.
George Pascal Watson from The Sun in London. Can you tell us how the pictures that you did see in Al Jazeera made you feel, how disgusting the images were, and how shocking they were around the world? And can you also confirm whether you or not you thought that the Americans who'd been killed in those pictures had actually been executed?
I wouldn't want to comment on that. I would say the pictures were disgusting. Sir?
Li Baozhong from the Xinhua News Agency of China. Do you think the pictures of Al Jazeera will influence the morality of U.S. troops or the psychology of American people?
I don't think I understood your question. I'm sorry.
I'm said the pictures of the Al Jazeera's TV showed the badly killed U.S. troops, servicemen. Do you think these pictures will badly influence the morality of U.S. troops or the psychology of American people?
Well, I understand the question. Certainly, I don't think that these pictures will damage either the psychology of our soldiers, morale of our soldiers, or the steadfastness of our government, or the resolve of our people. We're a pretty tough people.
With respect to WMD, a moment, you've now taken quite a substantial part of the country and you haven't found anything. Do you think this WMD, i.e. chemical, was deployed forward and has been successfully withdrawn to Baghdad? or was it always concentrated in that area? Where do you actually think it is?
I think we'll find WMD once we have had an opportunity to occupy Baghdad, stabilize Iraq, talk to Iraqis that have participated in the hiding and in of the development of it, and it will take some time. We should not expect to immediately come across it, although there are reports that some units in the vicinity of El Qut may have some type of chemical weapons. And of course, we're taking the necessary precautions to deal with that. But I have no doubt that we'll find weapons of mass destruction, but you shouldn't think it's going to happen tomorrow. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell us anything about what is going on in the western and northern parts of Iraq?
In the West, we continue operations there against logistics nodes, command and control facilities, and against some of the Iraqi commando units that operate out there. We, of course, are continuing to look for the possibility of what we would call Scud missiles that could operate from there and did operate from there and launch against various targets back in 1991. We have a very sophisticated air and ground effort that's going on out there that we regard as being quite successful. In the north, we have forces there that are primarily designed to help stabilize the region and also to target pro-regime units that operate in northern Iraq. We have any Arab media here that would like to call on? You already had a question, sir. Yes, sir.
We were led to believe that our troops, our forces would be welcome there. General Frank said yesterday that there are no major Iraqi formations there, so why haven't we gone in?
Well, the situation in Basra is not unlike that in Nasiriyah, where you have the majority of the people, I think, legitimately looking forward to the arrival of coalition forces and small groups of regime supporters and irregular forces that are embedded in the population and offering some resistance. I think all of us should understand that in these very large urban areas, it will take a long time to ensure that various regime support elements are brought under control. And I think that that we have done quite well, actually, in all the areas that we've passed through. And you also have to understand that we're not looking to go in and fight house to house in all of these areas either. Yes, sir.
Tom Perry from CBC Radio in Canada. How does it change the fight for you going up against irregular forces? And does it raise the risk of you killing real civilians?
Well, there's a risk in war of always killing civilians. And again, I'd like to once again reemphasize that we do more as a coalition, probably than any other coalition in history, to protect the lives of innocent civilians. It does not raise the risk to the operation. These are problems that can be dealt with along the lines of communication, and the main forces that are closing on Baghdad are powerful and unstoppable. Yes, sir.
Paul Hunter, CBC Television in Canada. Re the Patriot incident, could you tell us what investigators will be looking at, what the range of possible explanations is, and whether it's affected your faith in the Patriot as an instrument?
I think I'll ask my British colleague to answer that question.
I'm not in a position here to divulge the way in which this is going to be conducted. Suffice to say, it'll be a thorough investigation. It'll be conducted certainly by the Royal Air Force in concert with US forces. The outcome will be disclosed between both nations, and we are confident that we shall come to a conclusion which will enable us to make these procedures and processes better in the future. For the time being, we're reviewing our current practice, and we're satisfied that if we went out tomorrow from a UK perspective, we would conduct our activities just as we have, in concert with coalition procedures, been doing up until now. And if I could just add that the aircraft in question was conducting a mission, the like of which has only been going on in this war for a few days. But if we look back to before D-Day, it's actually been going, those sort of missions have been going on for a protracted period. And these procedures have stood us in good stead for a very, very long time. And so it's against that backdrop that we should be looking into the issues of today. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
General Nicholas Witchell, BBC. Nobody thought this was going to be simple, but given the degree of resistance, which I think you concede has been unexpected, the level of casualties, now the prisoners of war, is it not the case that this is proving to be significantly more difficult than you might have hoped?
No. Yes, sir.
Gary Dillon, CanWest News Canada. I was just wondering, sir, how the convoy, the supply convoy, was actually ambushed. I was just wondering some more details when, and I was wondering if the U.S. military now knows where the POWs are and whether, in fact, you've established contact with the other side to negotiate their release. What are you doing? Just if you could bring us up to speed, that'd be grand.
No, we do not know where our prisoners are. As far as the incident concerning the convoy, I believe that it is probably like many other tragic incidents in war, that a young officer leading his convoy made a wrong turn and went somewhere where he wasn't supposed to. There weren't combat forces around where it happened.
Just a brief update for those of you just joining us. The military today giving a news conference at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha, Qatar, acknowledging that it has been a very tough day for the U.S. military. Despite that, the bombing attacks continue in and around Baghdad. We can tell you right now, according to a Reuters correspondent who is on the ground in Baghdad, multiple explosions are going on right now. This reporter is calling it the heaviest air attack of this war campaign so far. The correspondent saying that fires are blazing in the southeast part of the city. The sky is full of smoke. This coming on a day where the U.S. military has certainly met with lots of resistance on the part of Iraqi forces. However, the officials in Doha saying the enemy remains in grave danger. Our victory is certain.
As you look at these pictures of Baghdad coming to you live, bear in mind, this latest bombardment occurred roughly at midnight, which was 44 minutes ago. And as you look at these pictures, also bear in mind that U.S. forces are now really on the outskirts of Baghdad, within a day's march, it is described. In fact, the 3rd Infantry Division's 2nd Brigade, with whom our Greg Kelly is embedded, covered roughly 230 miles in 40 hours with 70 tanks and 60 Bradley fighting vehicles and others. They are now less than 100 miles from Baghdad, but they did meet with some resistance in Najaf. Ground forces, though, were helped by the Air Force. Thunderbolt attack planes struck a line of Iraqi vehicles, B-52 dropping bombs on the trailing Iraqi infantry, and now, just 44 minutes ago, the latest in what is described by one reporter who is there in Baghdad as the heaviest bombing yet has occurred. Back now to CENTCOM and the news briefing.
But I'm also certain that when the history of this campaign is written, that people will look at this move that the land forces have made in this amount of time as being not only a great military accomplishment, but an incredible logistics accomplishment. But we'll wait until we arrive in Baghdad to discuss the history of the campaign. Yes, ma'am.
Donna Linewand with USA Today. Are you satisfied with your strategy in Nasiriyah on Saturday, or do you think it was a tactical error not to occupy that city?
We are satisfied with the strategy of our campaign plan. It's on track. It's being very successful in the broadest military sense. There will be times when actions will happen throughout the sector where loss of life will occur, but I would also emphasize that we do not consider the actions taking place in the sector as a defeat of any kind. Yes, sir.
Marco Berdazzi, Italian News Agency, ANSA. Did you strike any other terrorist target like the camp of last Friday? And did you find any link, any evidence of link between the Iraqi regime and terrorist organization?
Well, again, the discussion about links between the Iraqi regime and terrorist organizations are very clear-cut. And we know that they exist. And I don't know that that's really something appropriate for me to comment on. In the back, please.
Radio. I have two questions for you. The first is independent television news is claiming that the death of their correspondent Terry Lloyd was caused by coalition fire. Do you have any comment on that? The second question is how great a blow is it to your overall strategy to be moving the the Army's fourth away from the northern sector because Turkey would not give permission for those troops to move through their territory?
First of all, I believe you're talking about the death of the correspondent in the north, or the British correspondent?
The British correspondent in the south.
I'm sorry, I have no information concerning the details of what happened there. So I really can't answer that. As to your question about the 4th Infantry Division equipment being moved to the south, I think it's a prudent measure to move it to the south, because it's clear that in the near term we would not be able to get the division and its equipment into the north in a timely manner as a result of the various negotiations with Turkey. Having said that, we do have an overflight agreement with the Turks that is in effect. We remain committed to our relationship with the Turkish military and government, and we're satisfied that we are able to apply the pressure we need to apply to be successful in the north with various strategies that we've employed. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Tim Shipman from the London Daily Express. I was wondering, General, if you might explain a apparent discrepancy in the figures. You're saying 12 people are missing. Those pictures seem to show 5 people captured and around about 10 or 11 bodies. How do you explain the difference in those numbers?
I cannot explain the difference in the numbers. I don't know that the numbers that you have said are what I observed. Those of us that had the unfortunate opportunity to see those pictures can come to different conclusions about them. I think that I will leave that for further investigation as time goes on. Yes, sir.
Mike Coffin with Fox. With the Republican Guard units believed to be around Baghdad and to the north of Baghdad, do you anticipate that the fighting will intensify here in the coming days?
I believe that there is a high probability that we will come into contact with Republican Guard units in and around Baghdad. Whether or not they fight with any degree of tenacity remains to be seen. Suffice it to say that we are applying significant pressure on them from the air as ground troops continue to close with them. Didn't you already ask a question once before tonight? Yes. I'm new at this, and I won't do that again. Only one question per person. Yes, sir.
In Greece. Are you aware of any Turkish troops that have entered North Iraq, and do you think that such a move would create a bigger problem in the area?
I think to set the record straight, we all need to understand that there have been Turkish troops in northern Iraq for a long time. And so the Turkish troops that were in northern Iraq before the war started remained there. There have been various reports of reinforcement of those troops, but that is not correct to my knowledge. Yes, ma'am.
From Hong Kong Cable TV News. Do you know where Saddam Hussein is up to this moment? And if you confirmed Saddam is dead, will you stop to attack Iraq, or you just continue to attack Iraq until you occupy the country?
I think General Franks said yesterday that this campaign is not about the single person of Saddam Hussein. It's about a brutal and corrupt regime that has used weapons of mass destruction against its own people that must be overthrown. We will continue the attack until the regime is overthrown. Yes.
from Associated Press. I'd like just a few more details on the ambush of the supply convoy. How many people were in the convoy? How many have been rescued successfully? Can you give us some details on the extraction process? And also, can you give us an update on the fighting in Najaf, further to the north?
The supply convoy, I can only confirm for you that 12 people in the convoy are missing. I cannot confirm the size of the convoy. I can tell you that the convoy, that the remnants of it after the attack were relieved by a Marine unit that attacked and drove off the attackers and evacuated additional wounded that were on the scene. And as I'm sure all of you understand, giving you numbers and details within hours of the battle is very difficult to do accurately, so I would prefer not to do that. Yes, sir. Oh, Najaf? What about Najaf?
Fighting there?
Well, I wouldn't want to say. Yes, sir.
General Pete Smallwood from Knight Ridder. Can you comment on reports from Iran that an overshot Tomahawk missile landed there, and also that American and British pilots have been invading Iranian airspace?
I know of no aircraft that have violated Iranian airspace. It's certainly not our intention to violate Iranian airspace. I know that the Iranians have complained about some ordnance that they say landed in their territory, and we are investigating it. Yes, sir.
Where do the Kurds fit into this, General? Are there any plans to have the Kurds involved in attacks in the war?
The Kurds fit into this as one of the great peoples of Iraq, and we have had friendly relations.
And now let's go back to Sky TV. These are actually the pictures we're looking at now, and correspondent David Chater is on the air. Let's listen to what he has to say.
And the undergrowth and the fire is beginning to spread, and they're all combing through the area with torches and headlights and with their weapons at the ready. There's been a lot of gunfire, a lot of shouting, and they're still going on at the moment. It could be related to what happened before about this missing so-called pilot, or the pilot that was seen dropping into the Tigris. It would be a natural assumption to make.
Indeed. David, bear with us. I want to go back to Ian Woods in Washington. Ian, we heard reports of this missing Allied aircraft that from Iraq.
All right, well, you were just listening very briefly to David Chater of our sister network, Sky News. Just to recap, if you're joining us, military officials are saying that 12 American troops are missing after an ambush in southern Iraq. They're giving some more details around the al-Nasiriyah area that may have led to some heavy American casualties. The man who has been at the podium at the briefing, Lieutenant General John Abizaid, who's number 2, just behind Tommy Franks, says the fighting there was the sharpest engagement so far. He says that coalition forces met with significant resistance there. All this coming as at least 5 prisoners, apparently Americans captured during fighting in Iraq, are being seen on TV. Al Jazeera displaying some truly frightening images. Disgusting is the word that American officials are using. Let's go back and listen to the briefing.
Take time. Yes, sir.
Small pockets of resistance, or I think you just described it as kind of chaotic elements left behind. Could that possibly mark the beginning of an organized resistance or guerrilla campaign behind your lines?
I don't think that this marks the beginning of anything. I think that it indicates that there are certain elements in the regime that will fight against us wherever they may show themselves, because they want to protect their status and privileges that they have reaped from the regime. And I think it's not unusual that certain elements will fight. I don't think that you'll find over time that these groups will create a significant difficulty for the overall achievement of the military objectives of the coalition. I think we have time for about one more question. Yes, sir.
John Melvin, Koch newspapers.
Can you give us any more detail on the background of the person who was accused in the grenade attack, whether he has made any statements, or do you have any clearer idea of his motivation, any prior blemishes on his record?
No, and of course, being a member of the United States Armed Forces, you can certainly understand that the incident is under investigation, and I can't really, in my position, comment on either the person or the nature of what happened there for obvious reasons. I think we'll take one more question. Yes, sir.
Do you use the sky of France to send the B-52 from England?
Did we use
the French sky to...
Did we use French skies? I don't have any idea. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
This has been a CENTCOM briefing. Let's go back to our sister station, Sky News. David Shader is talking about the intense bombing in Baghdad. Let's listen.
Very alert, all very nervous, and a thorough search is going on here. They must have, they suddenly arrived out of nowhere, and there's a bit of bombing going on in the background now too, so a lot of activity here suddenly on the Tigris bank. And it's literally beneath me, combing through every garden with their guns at the ready.
Wilf Owen, our defence analyst, is with us in the studio as well. Wilf, when forces get involved with armed combat, I suppose every time they go on a mission they have to prepare.
You've been listening to Sky TV. David Shader, who is in Baghdad, was describing multiple explosions that took place there. Another reporter is describing this as one of the heaviest attacks, if not the heaviest attack of the war so far, setting buildings ablaze, clouds of smoke up into the sky. So we're going to continue to follow what's happening there. In the meantime, you've been listening for the better part of an hour to CENTCOM, a news briefing there. Here's a quote: "We will arrive in the vicinity of Baghdad soon." They are less than 100 miles from Baghdad now, on the precipice of entering the larger metropolitan area of that city. Here are the highlights of what was revealed at today's news briefing. The pressure continues on command and control centers. They have been struck. Bombs hit Baghdad and continue to strike the Republican Guard. They did admit, on a very sad note, that 12 American soldiers are missing in al-Nasiriyah in an ambush of an army supply convoy, apparently a ploy or a ruse to pretend that Iraqi soldiers were surrendering, and then they attacked U.S. soldiers. But importantly, notwithstanding what's being shown on Iraqi television of armed forces shooting in the water at some fictional pilot that has been downed, quote, "No planes, according to CENTCOM, have been shot down. No pilots have parachuted." Lori?
One of the more disturbing developments today is this video that was seen on Al Jazeera TV earlier of at least 5 prisoners, apparently Americans, captured during fighting. The video showing bodies in uniform that are identified as Americans. Let's go now to our man at the Pentagon, Brett Baer, who has the very latest on that and the rest of the day's news. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Laura and Greg. We just want to wrap up that briefing as well. Lieutenant General John Abizaid, long thought in this building as a superior briefer with very detailed pictures and descriptions of the battlefield. You saw that he took questions for quite a long time there and described the fighting today as intense, the sharpest engagement of the war so far, a lot of it centering around the southern, south-central town of al-Nasiriyah, which there was a lot of fighting there today. He also, as you mentioned, reported that 12 Army soldiers, part of a supply convoy, are missing. However, he went on to say that some of them have ended up on Iraqi TV. We can report to you that we have the tape that was shown on Iraqi TV and then subsequently on Al Jazeera television. We at Fox have chosen not to air that tape. We can tell you it is gruesome. We had defense officials look at it in our bureau here at the Pentagon. They were essentially lockjawed and described it as grisly. We can tell you that that the interviews that go on that tape, you can see people very scared as they're talking to the interrogations. We shouldn't even call them interviews. They're interrogations, which is strictly against the Geneva Convention, according to Pentagon officials. And the hope here is that the Geneva Convention will be adhered to regarding the treatment of prisoners of war. The statement saying that the coalition forces hold thousands of Iraqi prisoners. They are all being treated humanely and are in full compliance with the Geneva Convention. We fully expect that the Iraqi military will do the same. Now, General Abizaid also talked about the forces that were attacking today. They believe there were both uniformed forces, Special Republican Guard forces that moved south, and also irregular troops, he called them. These, we know them to be Fedayeen troops. That is called the Men of Sacrifice, special troops not dressed in uniforms, essentially dressed in civilian clothes on different trucks with machine guns on top, bouncing around the desert, trying to do these sabotage attacks. We can tell you in at least a couple of occasions today, U.S. and coalition forces came under attack from behind, and that one of these occasions happened with this supply convoy. Let's listen to Lieutenant General Abizaid describe some of the things that have been going on in the battlefield.
We're not? There were several incidents reported today in which there were types of behavior that I can only describe as ruses that were perpetrated by the enemy. In one incident, a flag of surrender was displayed, and it was followed up by artillery fire. In another incident, there were troops dressed in civilian clothes that appeared to welcome the forces and then ambushed them. So there are a number of incidents occurring to the rear of the main combat forces. None of these incidents, however, I would characterize as posing a danger to the overall success of the mission.
He went on to say that these actions are the actions of a desperate regime, desperate people rather, trying to save a doomed regime. He said they have not seen one organized military movement in the entire battlefield, but admits that some of the resistance has been heavy at points as troops continue to move toward Baghdad. We can report that the success in that march to Baghdad as far as moving forward has been significant, and that the 3rd Infantry Division is now within 100 miles of the city. We also can tell you that troops are now in Al-Qut, which is to the south and east of Baghdad, and Lieutenant General Abizaid says that there are reports, and they are investigating chemical weapons being found, artillery shells with chemical weapons in the city of Al-Qut. That had long been suspected here based on intelligence, and now Lieutenant General Abizaid says there are artillery shells being found that they are looking into specifically. As far as the search ongoing in Baghdad, as David Chater has reported with Sky News, Iraqis are seen along the Tigris River there, searching frantically up and down. We've seen this all day. In fact, earlier we saw them shooting into the river there. Lieutenant General Abizaid says no planes have been shot down, no pilots have ejected. Of course, he did say that the one accidental shoot down today happened with a British Tornado that was shot down by a Patriot anti-missile battery along the Kuwaiti-Iraqi border. There are a number of developments to talk about. We can tell you that the Republican Guard has been pounded consistently out around Baghdad, and again, they're continuing the air campaign as we speak. Lori, Greg, back to you.
All right, excellent information. Brett Baer, thank you very much. And now we want to go all the way across the world to the Iraqi-Kurdish demarcation line. There has certainly been a lot of activity. Just within the last couple of days, we know that Turkish troops had entered northern Kurdistan, and now we want to go a little bit further south to the line between Iraq and the Kurdish-controlled territory, where Chris Klein is on the video phone for us. And Chris, if you would please give us the very latest developments from your vantage point.
Lori, I'm about 2,000 yards from Iraqi frontline positions, and today this sector of the front has remained relatively quiet. However, a trickle of enemy soldiers did surrender to local Kurdish forces. The thing that is probably worthwhile mentioning more on the human front rather than the war front was the local Kurdish reaction to those gruesome and profoundly disturbing images a lot of the world saw, if not in the West, certainly throughout the Middle East and the greater Islamic world, of those American KIA servicemen killed in action, as well as Iraqi hands. I can tell you here, in the company of a local Kurdish commander of Free Kurdish Forces, the equivalent of a colonel in the American or British Army, a man commanding some 1,000 fighters, that he was filled with absolute revulsion and told me that most of his villagers, most of his soldiers who very attentively watched Arab television and saw those profoundly disturbing images all concurred with him. He also pointed out that as 2 Iraqi soldiers surrendered to his forces today, briefly after that act, they were handed over to 2 American officers, part of the very small advanced team of U.S. Special Forces, and soon to be joined by other Allied Special Forces operating in this region, and told us that in contrast to the treatment that he had seen of the American POWs, he relayed to me that the first thing the 2 U.S. officers said to him was, have these 2 Iraqi POWs been fed? Have they been given water? Do they need medical treatment? And he told us, you see, this is the difference between us and them. We all recognize what we saw, and he was speaking of himself and his fighters, and he said, this is the profound difference between us. Anyone who has any spirit of humanity in his heart would not do such a thing. This is the work of animals. Now, I suppose, and I understand that that is tremendous hyperbole, but then again, the Kurds have suffered hugely at the hands of the Iraqi regime, and coinciding with this event, Kurdish Free Radio has been broadcasting announcements throughout this region to the general population to render any aid to the possibility of finding any downed Allied airmen or servicemen or servicewomen who need assistance. They've even provided instructions on how to approach Allied soldiers in need of help, to approach them gently with their hands up in the air so as not to intimidate them if they might think that they are irregular forces with other motives, and to render them assistance, to provide them shelter, food, medical care, and really it's a rather poignant thing from the Kurdish perspective. They are staunch allies of the United States. They believe in the United States as liberators, and their forces are waiting, very eagerly awaiting the arrival of Allied forces here. Lori.
Chris Klein reporting from very close to the Iraqi front line on the Iraqi-Kurdish demarcation line. Chris, thank you very much for that update. So once again, just underscoring the difference between the way that American troops are treating POWs and the way that apparently the Iraqis are treating our POWs. First questions that the United States forces were asking the prisoners: have you been fed? Do you need medical care? Greg.
We're joined now by Fox News military analyst, retired Army Captain David Christian. Captain, thanks very much for being with us. I know you must be very saddened and very much like CENTCOM, to use their terminology, disgusted by the pictures that were shown on Al Jazeera television, apparently emanating from Iraqi television and videotape of American soldiers, some dead, laying on the floor. It appeared as though they had been executed according to a reliable account. Others being interrogated, paraded before cameras as propaganda. You, if I recall, your biography, were held captive by several different enemies on different occasions. How does this strike you?
I was held captive not as a prisoner of war, but I can tell you in training, in Green Beret training, we had this intense, if you were selected to be a POW, so to speak, and you would be a medical POW or whatever. And the torture training was so horrible that I made up my mind. I kept saying, this is only training. This is only training. They cannot kill you. And after a couple days, I said to myself, you know, they may make a mistake and actually go too far and kill me. But I also made and burned an image in my head that I would never, ever be taken as a prisoner, because I realized that they can just do everything and anything, and they can almost break every human being. If a person does not want to act by the Geneva Conventions, if they want to act as animals. I was crestfallen by this news, and also, Greg, I can tell you, I was angered by this news. As a former combatant on the battlefield, I carried prisoners of war on my back. I captured them, and we carried them 8 and 10 kilometers. I still have scars on my shoulders from where the prisoners hung on to my gear, and it dug into my shoulders and made sure that no one injured or killed them, and took them to a POW camp where they got training, or treatment, that is. I'm shocked by this. These are not soldiers. These are not these people that would do this. The classification that has come from the generals in reference to the Kurdish generals saying that they're animals, I would have to go with that classification. Only an animal would treat a human being in this fashion, and it just saddens me. They're fellow Americans, and it makes me more intent to see our soldiers get into Baghdad and rid this country of this plague that is allowing people and cultivating such a personality in people and such a philosophy that they would do and carry out such treacherous acts.
Captain Christian, it's Lori Dew up in the studio. We heard Lieutenant General John Abaizid saying he's very disappointed in Al Jazeera for running these images. He calls it absolutely unacceptable. He also said that this would be a clear violation of the Geneva Convention. But knowing what you know, realistically, would we ever really expect Iraq to adhere to the Geneva Convention?
No, and many of the countries that we have engagements with do not adhere to the Geneva Conventions. But because someone else does something wrong doesn't mean that we should not adhere to the Geneva Conventions. We're treating the people humane. Al Jazeera and also Abu Dhabi TV, I think they're acting as a propaganda instrument in terms of psychological warfare to get out images that they want to get out to the Iraqi people and also to the Arab world and possibly to the European community, so that the European community would intervene and possibly stop the war and go into negotiations, so to speak. I don't see that happening. I see our commanders, I see General Franks and all the other command there. We're pushing through. Right now, I think we have forces probing in and around Baghdad, and we're hitting Baghdad with much more might. What they've done is they've awakened, you know, a real giant now, because people now we have to settle a score.
Captain, the salient sentences of the Geneva Convention, Article 13, are as follows, and I think we can put it on the screen. There it is. Prisoners of war must at all times be humanely treated. No prisoner may be subjected to physical mutilation or to medical or scientific experiments of any kind. They must be protected, particularly against acts of violence or intimidation and against insults and public curiosity. Measures of reprisal against prisoners are prohibited. Is the violation of that a war crime? And can we find the people who did it?
We can take this to The Hague, and the leaders, number one, are responsible for this. And as people have been hunting down German people that committed war atrocities from World War II against the Jews, we can hunt down those that have committed war atrocities in any way, shape, or form and present this to The Hague and to the International Court, and these people can be tried, yes. Whether they are signers or not, I must add.
Captain David Christian, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Lori.
Well, reaction keeps coming in this afternoon to the gruesome images on Al Jazeera TV from the folks running the war at CENTCOM headquarters in Doha, Qatar. That is where our very own Mike Tobin is standing by. Mike, you just got out of the news conference, which ended just a few moments ago. What's the latest from there, please?
Well, it was certainly very interesting to hear Lieutenant General Abazaid speak directly to the Al Jazeera reporter and indicate that he was very disappointed that Al Jazeera would run those pictures. Clearly, the most disturbing video we have seen in this conflict, and you know, possibly ever in my career as a journalist, where you can see these individuals who appear to have been assassinated and what clearly appear to be American prisoners of war being interrogated by a state-run media. He said there is a big difference between the unilateral or embedded media running across prisoners of war and a state-run media broadcasting these individuals being harassed out over the air. He said whoever is responsible for this will be held accountable. Here's a little bit of what General Abazaid had to say.
as we progress in our campaign throughout Iraq, in the vast majority of places we have been welcomed. And I think that the people of Iraq who see those images will not be heartened, they'll not be encouraged, they'll just regard it as one more brutality inflicted upon people by a regime that has inflicted countless brutalities upon their people.
Lieutenant General Abizaid also talked about the most intense fighting the forces have encountered yet at An-Nasiriyah. He spoke about the convoy that was ambushed. He said apparently someone got their directions crossed, took a wrong turn, and got off by themselves away from the bulk of the protective force and were attacked by an irregular Iraqi army unit. They talked about these irregular Iraqi army units, and above and beyond that, they talked about these Iraqis who would masquerade as those wanting to surrender. Then when the forces get close, they attack. He said in response to that, they will only be more cautious in approaching surrendering Iraqis. They will continue to respect human life as they conduct this campaign. The generals here cannot get away from the questions about chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. When will you find them? He said, Lieutenant General Abizaid said, they will begin to find the weapons of mass destruction, illegal weapons, when they control Baghdad, when they control Iraq, and they can start interviewing the individuals who would be in the know. He did say there are some indications that some of the Iraqi forces in Al-Qut do possibly possess chemical weapons. And let me throw it back to you now, Lori.
Mike, just a quick point to reinforce. Despite this being a very tough day, as the military officials called it, for American troops, despite this, the bombing continues. The enemy remains in grave danger. That's what CENTCOM officials said, and our victory is certain.
Absolutely. They are not undaunted by what is happening here. They're not discouraged, I think. Everyone is clearly upset by the video images that we have seen. Everyone is clearly upset by the downing of the British Tornado aircraft today by the U.S. Patriot missile. In fact, the British contingency spoke about that, with Major General Wallace saying that the Patriot missiles have saved more lives, particularly with the 4 Iraqi missiles being shot indiscriminately at the coalition forces in Kuwait. That the Patriot missile prevented more loss of life. And what has happened is an unfortunate incident. They are investigating it, but it does not prevent them. It does not, I guess, get them off the line of going after their achieved goals, which is to disarm the regime.
All right. Very good to keep that in perspective. Mike Tobin at CENTCOM headquarters, thanks very much. We'll check back in with you later. Greg?
In case you're just now joining us, the images on the right-hand side of the screen, of course, are of Baghdad, where some of the most intensive bombing began about an hour and 18 minutes ago. And let me just correct the transposition. The time there in Baghdad when this began was not midnight, as I stated earlier, but rather 10 o'clock. I apologize for the math. So we're going to continue to follow the developments there in Baghdad. In the meantime, other images are very gripping. They were shown, as we mentioned, on Al Jazeera television today. They're disturbing. Some American troops lying dead and others alive being interrogated in front of video cameras. More on that now from Greg Palkot, who's standing by live in Amman, Jordan. Greg?
Hey, Greg, we'll get to that in a moment. Just a quick update about what you were talking about, the situation in Baghdad right now. This is the 5th night of airstrikes, and more explosions have been reported just in the past couple of hours. Multiple explosions, in fact. One building seen ablaze in the southeastern part of the country. According to witnesses on the ground, this so far has been the toughest night yet of the 5 nights of attacks on Baghdad. The scene right now is quiet, but as we said about an hour and a half ago, there was a series of explosions. And in fact, it's not just in the nighttime anymore, daytime as well. Several 6 to 7 explosions reported in late afternoon in Baghdad. Also in mid-morning, there were explosions around the outskirts of Baghdad. Again, day and night attacks on the capital of Iraq. That capital shrouded in smoke, not so much from the attacks, but from the trenches of oil which have been set on fire. The Iraqis hoping that'll throw off the guidance systems on these bombs and missiles, but it does very, very little. Just fills up the city with smoke. Baghdad not the only other city, not the only city being hit today and tonight in these air raids. Mosul up in the northern part of Iraq also, we are told, being hit. And now to those gruesome videos, the scenes of the purportedly to be of the American prisoners of war, as well as soldiers who were killed, being shown by Iraqis on Iraqi television, also on Arab television. I think the one thing that I would like to add to the discussion of this is our understanding that this is part and parcel of the strategy of the government of Saddam Hussein, and there was no clearer indication of that than the words we heard earlier today in a press conference by Iraq's Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan, and I quote, he said, this is late morning, he said this: within a few hours you will see captured enemy soldiers, Americans who have been captured, who harassed Souk al-Shayuk. You will see them on Iraqi television. Now, Souk al-Shayuk is a village near al-Naziriyah, and that is where this incident took place, and that is where these individuals were captured and some apparently killed. Here in Amman, I'd just like to add, we're seeing the Arab street finally rising up. We've been waiting for this to happen, and we've been seeing in the last couple of days. Today at the university here in Amman, several thousand young people clashing with police here. One of about 50 protests around the country, we are told, in Jordan against the war that we have seen just in the last couple days. That is the latest from Amman. Back to you folks in New York.
All right, Greg Palcott, thank you very much. Well, Saddam Hussein, as we all know, has a history of torturing his own people and very much torturing American prisoners during the Gulf War. We know that back in 1991, some Gulf War veterans said that they were beaten just for the fun of it by Iraqis. These are very cruel people. Correspondent William Lajeunesse is live in Kuwait City with more on that. Hello, William.
Well, indeed, Laura, you know, seeing those captured soldiers is heartbreaking, and talking about it, hearing about it, can be uncomfortable. That is not our intent, but sometimes by looking back and put the present in focus and maybe tell people what's going on behind the camera that isn't always obvious. Indeed, just last year, 17 of the POWs who were finally released from the first Gulf War filed a $900 million lawsuit against Iraqi assets in the United States. And the purpose of that was, in their words, to deter the mistreatment of future POWs. So let's take a look back right now to some video that many people remember of well, the first one is Navy Lieutenant Jeff Zahn. Unknown to viewers worldwide at this time, this video was made with a gun to his head. He received daily death threats, regular beatings, hypothermia. He lost 30 pounds. Air Force Captain Dale Storr was shot down on February 2nd. He was kept in a dark, dank cell. On day 3, they broke his nose, they dislocated his shoulder, they punctured his eardrums. Marine Captain Michael Berryman was beat with an axe handle. They broke his leg with a metal pipe. Others were blindfolded, handcuffed, left cold and hungry. They, too, were tortured on a regular basis. Electric shocks were used when they did not say what they were told. All were finally released on March 5th. That was the end of the fighting and the ceasefire that was signed in Safwan. They owe their survival, in many cases, the fact that people did not forget about them and the fact that they were on TV and their survival had to be accounted for. Let's go present time to Kuwait. As many have heard last night, unfortunately, there was a very unusual, bizarre incident at Camp Pennsylvania here in North Kuwait. An American soldier is in custody for killing his superior officer. I think we have some video now. An attack came at Camp Pennsylvania about 2 a.m. local time. The motive was resentment because the man was not being sent to the front, and he was angry with the supervisor. Initially, the military thought it was a terrorist attack, that Muslim extremists or Iraqi sympathizers got in. In fact, it was this individual who was so disgruntled he threw 3 grenades, one into a command or tactical command center tent that killed 1 individual, injured 13, 3 seriously. They are receiving medical attention but are expected to survive. Now, one more element here. We've heard of unfortunate accident of a Patriot missile knocking out what they believe to be an RAF, Royal Air Force, British Tornado. The video you see here now was shot by our Sky affiliate that is believed to be the Patriot knocking out that airplane. Now, what people need to understand about how the Patriot system works, there are, as we know, 6,000 sorties in the last 4 or 5 days. The Patriot is tied into the AWACS system. It is this large radar umbrella, and it has to distinguish between friend or foe. It sends out a squawk or a signal to these airplanes, and the signal has to be sent back to the Patriot so that it knows it is a friend. Something many are speculating happened in that communication between the Patriot system and the RAF Tornado that went wrong. Finally, Lori, and I wanted to say that on the POW issue, here in Kuwait, as you probably know, there are still 600 POWs, Kuwaiti POWs, being kept by Iraq. They have horrible stories, including 7 women, and just 2 weeks ago, Iraq released Iranian POWs from a war that ended in 1988. Back to you.
All right, a lot of information. William Lajeunesse, thank you very much, reporting from Kuwait City. We'll check in with you later. Greg?
For more on the treatment of POWs, we're joined now by the former ambassador at large for war crimes, David Sheffer. Mr. Sheffer, thanks for being with us. According to the U.S. military and anyone with an ounce of humanity, the treatment of these American prisoners, as shown today on Al Jazeera television, underscores the brutality and the depravity of Saddam Hussein's regime, and in many ways only reinforces the reasons that we are there. What's your reaction to what happened here, and your estimation of how those responsible can be held to account?
Well, what has happened has an obvious character under the law. These were violations of the Geneva Convention, and there won't be much debate about that. But they are also emblematic of, frankly, 25 years of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity by the Iraqi regime. And as you just heard from your reporter in Kuwait City, we can look back at examples from the Iran-Iraq War, from the Gulf War, and now in this conflict as to the mistreatment of prisoners of war. So this is a long history of illegal conduct by the Iraqi regime, and I think it'll be very important to keep that historical perspective in mind when the day comes that if particular leaders are in fact apprehended, we consider how to bring them to justice, because this will be part of that package.
Ambassador, it's Lori Dew. How exactly do we go about this the right way? How do we find the people who are responsible for this? How do we hold them accountable? And how exactly would we go about prosecuting who's responsible for this?
Well, we're in a complex situation now because this is an armed conflict, and therefore it's not simply a tracking and apprehension exercise. It's actually a conflict whereby some of these individuals may not survive the conflict, those who we would normally bring to justice at the end of a conflict. But if in fact through the course of the conflict and through surrenders, as well as through just essential apprehensions, some of the leaders and even these individuals who were responsible for these particular American POWs are apprehended and brought into custody, either by U.S. forces or ultimately by Iraqis themselves as this conflict winds down and individuals are located and the general order, law and order of Iraq is restored. Then you have to determine how exactly are they brought to justice, and 3 options come to mind very quickly. One, there could be a military tribunal set up. Now, that is permissible, of course, under the Geneva Conventions, particularly since we would be an occupying power in Iraq. But I would say that that poses some severe risks for the United States in terms of how it's perceived internationally, what the reaction would be on the Arab street to a U.S. military tribunal. Another option would be revamped Iraqi courts themselves. But the problem with that is you really have to completely rip apart the Iraqi judicial system and put it back together again with credible judges, prosecutors, etc. That's going to take years.
What about The Hague?
A third option, of course, is The Hague, but we need to understand that jurisdiction is the issue here. Yeah. I think it would, one way we could repair that bridge with the Security Council right now, this is a responsibility that I don't think anyone should disagree about. The Security Council could easily authorize a very specialized ad hoc criminal tribunal for Iraq where these individuals could be taken out of that territory, away from any influence they may have there, and brought to trial for 25 years of crimes, this being one of them.
Yeah.
So that's one way we could take the initiative.
Let me move towards the provisions of the Geneva Convention, since you have said that multiple violations have taken place. In addition to prohibiting torture, let's put it on the screen. The Geneva Convention also demands visits by the Red Cross. It allows prisoners to write to their families. Broadcasting, as we saw today, of POWs is illegal, cannot be used for propaganda, only required to give their name and rank, no coercion or duress to secure information. They must be supplied with food and clothing, given all needed medical care, and repatriated if seriously ill or wounded. Some of these soldiers may have been literally murdered and executed. How often, and you're an expert on this, how often are these provisions violated?
Well, by the Iraqi regime, they're violated consistently in any armed conflict that it has been involved in since 1980. But they're also violated, you know, if you look throughout the continent of Africa and all of the conflicts there, you will see very little adherence at times to the Geneva Convention requirements. And they were not complied with by the Taliban or even by the northern resistance movement in Afghanistan prior to our intervention, and even allegedly after the intervention. There was a lot of give and take on Afghan territory with respect to the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and then the northern resistance as to whether or not they were in full compliance at all times with the Geneva Conventions. That was very, very, I mean, it continues to be a matter of great controversy.
Ambassador, final question. I need a very quick answer. You told our producer earlier that the U.S., of course, does abide by the regulations in the Geneva Convention, but we need to be extra cautious with Iraqi POWs because the eyes of the world are watching.
Well, exactly. You know, we always want to come to these matters with clean hands, and we do. The United States military, more than any other military in the world, is instructed in the rules and regulations of the Geneva Conventions. But we have to be very, very conscious that much of the rest of the world recalls how we conducted ourselves during the Afghan conflict with respect to what we described as illegal combatants, and then how we handled them. Now, we can debate that. Some of those are very technical issues under the convention. But the point is this: we need to always bear in mind that what goes around comes around, and we need to make sure that we're very consistent at all times in upholding the Geneva Conventions and actually leaning over backwards to do so. And I think we're doing that in this conflict. I don't know of a single instance that I have seen reported yet where the conduct of the U.S. military could be called into question in this conflict with respect to compliance with the Geneva Conventions.
David Sheffer, thank you very much for being with us. Very insightful. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Here's the latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom. Multiple explosions rock Baghdad in one of the heaviest air attacks of the war so far. The bombings, which began at about 10 o'clock Baghdad time, set buildings on fire, sending clouds of smoke into the sky. Central Command says 12 American soldiers are missing now after an ambush in southern Iraq. The sneak attack came after Allied forces met a unit outside Nasiriyah that showed signs it was preparing to surrender. Allied ground forces are now said to be within 100 miles of Baghdad. The 3rd Infantry Division's 2nd Brigade covering 230 miles in just 40 hours. American military brass say we should be in the Baghdad vicinity very soon. And I'm Greg Jarrett, along with Lori Dew in Studio B, and continuous coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom.
There have been so many developments today. We just heard from CENTCOM headquarters a short time ago. They acknowledged that this has been the most difficult day so far. But remember, we've got to keep in mind this campaign is only a few days old and so far has been very successful. The one dark cloud is this video tape that had run on Al Jazeera and other networks in which several Americans were shown being tortured and possibly murdered. We have chosen not to show you that tape. We don't think there's any need for it. But joining us now to talk more about this and how the war is going is Lieutenant Colonel Tim Eads, Fox News military analyst and U.S. Army Special Ops retired. Colonel Eads, first, your thoughts on this videotape and And how important is it that the government keeps saying that this is a violation of the Geneva Convention and whoever is responsible will be held accountable?
Well, from a personal standpoint, like everyone, I'm sickened by what I saw or heard I saw in the videotape. The main thing the U.S. forces have to keep in mind now is they're going to have to focus. They got to control their anger. Anybody who sees the videotape or hears about the videotape, which I guarantee all those troops out there will, they're starting to get tired. Adrenaline is starting to work on them. They're going to see that videotape and they're going to wonder, you know, how can I get back?
Right.
The commanders there are going to have to control that. You know, basically what you're going to tell your troops is, you know, in the famous words of Bruce Willis, it's time to cowboy up. We need to focus on the mission here and get it done.
And indeed, Colonel, it is cowboying up, so to speak. We've heard that just within the last hour and a half, fresh bombings over Baghdad. We know you've got the screenwriter there. If you would, just bring us up to date on the very latest military happenings.
Sure. Obviously, what's going on right now is we're hitting Baghdad. As Brett Baer said at the top of the hour, the other thing we're doing is we're hitting these Republican Guard units pretty substantially that are really going to be the next major forces that we're going to encounter, and in my estimation are probably going to decide how quickly this conflict is going to be over. In the next 24, 48, 72 hours, we are going to pound those Republican Guard units unmercifully. Now, it's not a function of we're on a timeline here. We're going to pound these guys. We're going to look and see how much we've attrited them, how successful our hits were on their tanks, their artillery, and those kind of things, and their troops that are in trenches. And then we're going to decide when we're going to start hitting them with our tanks, and then that's going to open the road to Baghdad. And it's going to be imperative. We're going to see as those troops how quickly they crumble. And they will crumble. We will pound them until they crumble. And then what's that effect? Are they going to start running? Are they going to run back into Baghdad? And as that happens, is the psychological effect of the retreat going to cause the entire collapse in Baghdad? Or it will also tell us, conversely, and unfortunately badly, that we're going to have to fight in Baghdad to get this thing over with.
Colonel Eads, while you're talking about Baghdad, excuse me, while you have it circled there, there had been some early conventional wisdom that the desire on the part of Saddam Hussein was to suck in American and coalition forces into Baghdad for urban warfare. But I want to get your opinion on that. It strikes some of us here, and I've talked to a couple of our military analysts, that Baghdad isn't geographically well suited for urban combat. Second of all, the Republican Guard isn't trained for that. And third, when it comes to engaging in that kind of conflict, in as much as most of his forces operate out of fear, not loyalty, they just might not do it. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you that it may happen that they may not fight. From the standpoint of if they're trained to fight in the city or not, if they have weapons, they're a dangerous force in the city. The geography of the city is it's very expansive, very wide open. We have gone to school on the Israelis in the West Bank and Gaza and seen their use of armor and fighting vehicles in the city. So we'll use that to our advantage. It will not be pretty, but I think from the aspect of will they fight, and they're not trained to fight, you know, that's anybody with an AK-47 is a dangerous opponent, as we saw in Somalia. The Somalis were obviously not trained to fight in Mogadishu and put up a pretty good rout.
Lieutenant Colonel Tim Eads, Fox News military analyst, thanks very much for joining us. I know we'll be coming back to you a bit later. Greg.
Well, the Pentagon responding to pictures on Al Jazeera television of U.S. troops captured and killed. Let's get the latest now, once again, from Brett Baer, who's standing by live. Brett, What is the latest there?
Well, Greg, as we heard here on Fox, Lieutenant General John Abizaid, the deputy commander of CENTCOM down in Qatar, briefing saying about the supply convoy. He called it a tragic incident where essentially the commander of a supply convoy with one of the groups, a division that was moving forward to Baghdad, essentially took a wrong turn, made a wrong decision. Then they were ambushed. We can tell you from there, he said 12 Army personnel are now missing, and some have ended up on Iraqi TV. He's talking about the tape, of course, that aired on Iraqi TV and then was simultaneously broadcast on Al Jazeera television. We have seen this tape. I personally have seen this tape. I can tell you that some interviews take place there with the prisoners of war. They are soldiers who, a couple of them look determined. They just say their name and their number, their serial number, social security number. Then they answer a few questions. A couple of them look very rattled and scared, obviously. Then there are other grisly and gruesome pictures of other soldiers which we won't describe. I can tell you that the reaction here at the Pentagon is of disgust and a call that the Iraqis comply with the Geneva Convention, which they are not doing by putting these interrogations, is what they're calling them, on television. Now, here's a quote from a senior defense official. "We fully expect Iraqi military forces to comply with the articles within the Geneva Convention relating to the treatment of prisoners of war. Any Iraqis who violate the convention will be considered war criminals and treated as such." It goes on to say that coalition forces hold thousands of Iraqi prisoners. They are all being treated humanely and in full accordance with the Geneva Convention. We fully expect the Iraqi military to do the same. Now, we heard from Lieutenant General Abizaid about the particular circumstance with this supply convoy in and around the city of Al-Nasiriyah, which troops moved through. The supply convoy then, as he said, took a wrong turn and was ambushed. We understand that that ambush happened with Special Republican Guard and also Special Security Organization troops with Saddam Hussein's regime. He said that some of them actually tried to surrender first. Let's take a listen.
There were several incidents reported today in which there were types of behavior that I can only describe as ruses that were perpetrated by the enemy. In one incident, a flag of surrender was displayed, and it was followed up by artillery fire. In another incident, there were troops dressed in civilian clothes that appeared to welcome the forces and then ambushed them. So there are a number of incidents occurring to the rear of the main combat forces. None of these incidents, however, I would characterize as posing a danger to the overall success of the mission.
He went on to say that there wasn't one single Iraqi military move that was coherent. He did not give specific numbers on wounded or fatalities. He said that may be coming out sometime soon. Greg?
Bret Baier at the Pentagon with the latest on that. Thank you very much, Bret.
Well, President Bush spent part of the weekend at Camp David but returned to the White House earlier today. We heard him speak earlier. He asked for God's comfort for coalition forces who have been killed and others who have apparently been captured in action today. Let's get a live report from Fox News Channel's James Rosen, who is standing by at the White House. Hi, James.
Hi, Lori. Hi, Greg. President Bush says today that slowly but surely Saddam Hussein is losing control of his country. The commander-in-chief returned to the White House shortly after 1 p.m. Eastern time today, following a morning at Camp David spent praying and receiving, quote, constant briefings on the status of the war effort from both the Pentagon and the National Security Council. Upon his return, the president held a rare and extensive question-and-answer session with reporters on the South Lawn. The president expressed satisfaction that coalition troops have secured the oil fields in the southern part of Iraq and also not been exposed to chemical or biological weapons attacks. And the commander-in-chief offered a quick top-to-bottom rundown of how the progress of coalition forces is moving in various parts of Iraq.
Most of the South is now in
coalition hands. Obviously, there's pockets of resistance in a place like Basra. We're making great progress. In the west, we're making great progress. The areas, the launch sites for the Scuds, well, certainly not 100% secure, but we made good progress. And so I can assure the American people we're making good progress, and also can assure them that this is just the beginning of a tough fight.
Now, the president also said he was briefed at least twice this morning on the status of American forces apparently taken prisoner by Iraqi forces and paraded before television cameras in images that have been broadcast on Al Jazeera and other Arab networks. Mr. Bush said he thinks it makes an interesting contrast with the many Iraqi soldiers who have, and I quote the president now, gleefully, happily surrendered to U.S. forces. And to the captors of those American forces, the president issued this stern warning.
The POWs I expect to be treated humanely. And just like we're treating the prisoners that we have captured humanely. If not, the people who mistreat the prisoners will be treated as war criminals.
Now, as Fox News has been reporting, the images on this tape are quite horrific, and apparently it would seem that the president was not briefed on exactly what was in those images, and certainly hadn't seen the tape before he issued those comments, because anyone, Greg and Lori, who has seen the tape would certainly feel reasonably confident in saying that the president's expectation that the American forces would be treated humanely was not met. Reporting live from the White House, James Rosen, Fox News. Back to you guys in New York.
All right, James, thanks very much for the update.
Let's get a live report now from Chris Klein. He is on the video phone in northern Iraq. And Chris, just how close are you to that Iraqi border with the Kurdish area, and what's been happening there?
We're exactly about, well, not exactly, but approximately 2,000 yards from Iraqi front positions where there are mortar batteries, machine gun emplacements, light anti-aircraft artillery, and a garrison, Iraqi garrison of indeterminate size. Throughout the last couple of days, there have been incidents of sporadic hostile fire coming from the Iraqi lines, some mortar rounds, the occasional chatter of machine guns. No casualties to report on the Free Kurdish side of the demarcation line. I'm speaking to you actually from the rooftop of the headquarters for the local battalion of Kurdish soldiers here, about 1,000 soldiers. And actually, I'm not sure what the view is precisely from the camera, but behind me to the west, we're approximately 10 miles from the city of Mosul, which we've been observing from our vantage point throughout the course of the last several hours, continually seeing the rather brilliant bomb flashes of ongoing Allied air action against that city, targeting command and control facilities, anti-aircraft defenses, and some of the heavier Iraqi ground formations ringing that city, that vital oil facility which Allied forces hope to secure, as well as an airfield which should play a prominent role once it is seized by Allied forces when they open up the northern front into a full-blown second front to coincide with Allied efforts further south.
We have lost Chris Klein there. It's cutting in and out. He is via video phone very close to the Iraqi border, describing some of the conflict that has been taking there. Lori?
Meantime, we have a Fox News alert, some new information for you. The Department of Defense has now identified the soldier who was killed at Camp Pennsylvania, Kuwait. The identity of the officer who was killed while he was sleeping in a tent is Captain Christopher Scott Seifert, 27 years old. He was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Very sad loss, making the ultimate sacrifice there once again. The man who was killed while he was sleeping in a tent in Camp Pennsylvania, Kuwait, Captain Christopher Scott Seifert, 27 years old. Our thoughts and prayers will be with his family. Greg.
Joining us now to talk a bit more about the ground war in Iraq is Brad Baker. He is a Gulf War veteran, a former Army Ranger. Thank you for being with us. Before we get into the ground campaign, I want to get your reaction to the saddest news that we have really heard in the last 3 days. In addition to the American and British lives that have been lost, we have seen this hideous account of prisoners of war, some who may have been executed, others who were being interrogated on television. If I recall your biography correctly, you not only served in the Gulf War, but you were guarding some Iraqi prisoners, correct?
Yes, sir, that's true. One of my jobs, obviously my specialty was medical. I did go through the basic and the advanced course of medical school. And one of my jobs as we rolled and made that great flanking movement was as we took on prisoners, it was my job and my team's job to actually go through and evaluate and basically triage every single prisoner that they had and that they were holding.
And how were they treated?
Well, you know, I have to tell you that, you know, my initial reaction when I heard about this was, you know, here we go again. And then hearing about this tape, and I have not seen the tape yet. But, you know, this is, here again, they're showing American soldiers. They're parading them. They're showing their bodies. Same thing we've seen in Somalia, because they know that this is going to get to the American people. I will tell you that the United States military, and that's all I'm going to speak for right now, but the United States Army, when we dealt with prisoners, we had very strict guidelines. We had people always watching us. We had interpreters always with us. At one time, I had a prisoner that I was loading onto the back of a Humvee. Their hands were handcuffed, and as I lifted them up to put them on the back of the Humvee, they split their lip open by hitting my shoulder. I had to write a page-and-a-half report of why he was bleeding. I mean, that's how it is for us. So believe me, we take the high road on everything that we do. And this, again, just shows why the Iraqi government, you know, needs to be taken out.
Mr. Baker, it's Lori Dew. I have a question for you to follow up on that. A few minutes ago, we interviewed someone who specifically was talking about war crimes and how POWs are treated. And obviously, the eyes of the world are going to be on us and how we treat the Iraqi prisoners of war. We're hearing from you firsthand that they were treated the way they should have been treated, and you adhere to the Geneva Convention. What kinds of things were you told to keep in mind as you were dealing with these POWs?
Well, you have to remember that the United States Army, we always took the high road on everything that we did. We were briefed and trained thoroughly. Right. Obviously, you know, we're told that there are certain things, you know, that we want to make sure that doesn't. Once they're in your custody and in your care, you're 100% responsible for them. So nothing had better happen to them. You know, there are certain boundaries that we know we can't overstep. We had to make sure that they were fed. We had to make sure that their clothing was indicative with the atmosphere. If it was a sandstorm, we had to provide protective gear for them. We had to provide chemical gear for them in the event there was a chemical attack. We went to great lengths to take care of these prisoners of war during the first Gulf War.
Yeah. Let me get your reaction to the pictures we're seeing right now. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll describe it to you and our viewers. These are some warthogs, I believe, that will be taking off from USS Constellation, and they provide a very valuable air asset to protect the ground troops. These warthogs, Mr. Baker, as I understand it, can take out enemy tank positions, and especially those Iraqi brigades that are amassed protecting the area just south of Baghdad as U.S. ground forces approach, correct?
That's correct. Ugliest planes in the world, but they're the greatest things to see in action. They're incredible planes. Their pilots are just simply incredible. If you have a chance to see any of the training they do, I mean, they come right down and just dive bomb them, basically. It's something spectacular to see. They have been around for a long time, and they're something that are very reliable, especially the workload that they did in the first war.
Very quick question to you finally. You are a Special Forces guy. If you could, we have learned that the role of Special Ops and Special Forces is very important. They're the first in. They were on the ground before the first bomb even fell. What's next for them?
Okay, well, first of all, I need to clarify that. I was in the Rangers.
I apologize.
I was not in, that's all right. I don't want people who see this to come back at me.
Okay.
But I will tell you that the Special Forces group, you know, they've been given certain objectives. They've been given certain things that they need to do, and those change. They're ongoing as the mission dictates. Those gentlemen are incredible. A lot of training, years of preparation, and when they go in, I mean, these are guys that if you ever get a chance to see them operate, it's something incredible. They're like surgeons, very professional, and they will get the job done no matter what it is.
Brad Baker, Gulf War veteran, thanks very much for sharing your perspective and information with us today. Fascinating.
Let me make a correction. It's not the Warthog that was on the Constellation, which is land-based. Apparently, those are some other planes that we were taking a look at. I apologize for that. But we are, nevertheless, looking at the USS Constellation.
Amazing that these operations go on 24/7. I was fortunate enough to spend a couple of days aboard an aircraft carrier where I flew in an F-14, and it was amazing to watch these planes take off and land in pitch black in the middle of the night.
Yeah,
so this is going on all the time. Well, turning now to some other news, Fox News has confirmed that Russian arms dealers are providing Iraq with some high-tech military equipment and also with assistance on how to use it. Let's get a live report now from Fox's Julie Kurtz, who is standing by in the Washington newsroom. Hi, Julie.
Hi there. Well, now that the lives of U.S. soldiers are directly threatened by the Russian-made equipment sold to Iraq, the Bush administration has thrown up its arms. U.S. officials are incensed and infuriated after quietly pressing Russia for a year. Yesterday, the United States delivered a formal protest to the Russian government for refusing to stop Russian arms dealers from selling illegal weapons and equipment to Baghdad. According to a U.S. official today, the last straw for the U.S. came on Friday when the Bush administration learned that Russian technicians from a Moscow-based company were in Iraq during the war, showing Iraqis how to use and fix electronic jamming equipment, pictured here in an old picture at a Russian air show. The U.S. has no reason to believe the Russian company technicians have left Iraq. The equipment is designed to block global positioning system guidance gear that is vital to aircraft navigation and U.S. ground forces now fighting in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. has known about the sales for about a year and has been pressing Moscow to force the Russian arms companies to stop the export. But it didn't happen, and now the Bush administration is going public with the protest. One U.S. official tells us that our government suspects that pieces of the jamming equipment were stashed in small boxes aboard UN-sanctioned humanitarian flights to Iraq over the last year. A U.S. official also confirms the sale of a, quote, militarily significant number of Russian-made missiles to Baghdad. Also, the Bush administration learned last month that an order of several thousand night vision goggles were due to be shipped by one Russian firm to Iraq. The U.S. government urged Moscow to stop the sale. Night vision goggles have given U.S. forces a big advantage. That would be diminished if Iraqi soldiers get the same equipment.
President Bush has put a lot of faith and confidence in President Putin. I know there have been some differences in the United Nations, but this is a clear violation of UN sanctions, and it's, in fact, aiding and abetting our enemy in this particular war.
The State Department tells us today that this is a very serious matter, and the response from the Russian government so far has been unsatisfactory. Back to you.
All right, Julie Kurtz reporting live in Washington, D.C. Thanks very much. We're looking at the USS Constellation, and apparently these jets have been taking off for the better part of the last 10 minutes or so. Now, these are Hornets, as I understand it, with the twin tails that have been taking off. Mistakenly mentioned them as Warthogs, which are planes that take off that are land-based, but these are the kinds of things we have been seeing taking off from the USS Constellation for the course of the last, 3 days, Lori?
Yeah, well, exactly. And the Constellation isn't the only aircraft carrier in the region, as we know. We've got carrier groups all over the place, and they've got the constant operations going 24/7. If we're lucky, we might see the Hornet actually take off. Hopefully we will. They do this about every couple of minutes. It's really quite remarkable to see that this operation is going on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, particularly in this time of war. Let's take a look. Maybe we'll see one take off. It really is very extraordinary. They go from 0 to 100 miles an hour in about a second. When I was lucky enough to fly on an F-14, it was really remarkable how you're just absolutely catapulted off of the deck of the carrier and you're on your way.
The G-forces are really tremendous, and thus they have these, flight suits that try to put pressure on the lower part of your body to drive some of the blood back up into your head and your eyes, so you don't have these sort of
here we go
gray outs.
It's taking off.
Look at that.
And there it goes off on Mission Unknown. as part of...
We should mention, speaking of these jets taking off, the Hornets, the bombing of Baghdad has continued with repeated strikes in the western part of the capital and other areas. One reporter on the scene in Baghdad described it as the heaviest bombing yet.
Well, a day full of developments, and that is going to do it for me, Lori Dew, and Greg Jarrett.
Gary Alexander, Bob Sellers, coming up next to take over our coverage. Stay tuned.
And I'll be back at 7 o'clock for the Sunday edition of the Fox Report. We hope that you'll keep it right here on Fox News Channel. Have a good day.
The reality of war's cruelty coming through on international television. Disturbing images on Al Jazeera television. The bodies of several American soldiers. Others being held by Iraqis. Terrified but holding strong and proud.
Chemical weapons factory. Our national security correspondent Brett Baer is live at the Pentagon with late-breaking details. Brett.
Hi, Lori. It is good news for the Pentagon on a tough day. Senior defense officials are confirming that coalition forces came across what is, as you described, a huge chemical weapons factory in the town of An-Najaf, which is about 90 miles south of Baghdad. We can tell you that there is a reporter with this particular group. It is the 3rd Infantry Division, actually the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division. This reporter is for the Jerusalem Post and wrote an excerpt today. We took a long time to confirm. Late tonight, we can tell you that defense officials are confirming now that there was a chemical plant in this town, An-Najaf. Now, the description is a huge 100-acre complex surrounded by an electrical fence. Unclear what chemicals are being made there. There are barracks around the facility. It wasn't immediately clear how protected it was. However, there was one soldier lightly wounded when a booby-trapped explosive went off as he was trying to get into the facility. We are also told by defense officials that the top general in charge of that facility is now in coalition custody. We are trying to get more details as it develops, but again, the news that a chemical weapons facility has been found in the town of An-Najaf as coalition forces continue to march to Baghdad. Lauren?
Brett Baer with breaking news tonight. Thanks, Brett. And that is your news. As Fox reports, this March 23rd, 2003, still ahead, the most powerful prime time in all of cable news. First up, more live team coverage of Operation Iraqi Freedom at the top of the hour. Fox News Live with Linda Vester. Then at 9 p.m. Eastern, Greta takes the helm. And after that, at 10 p.m. Eastern, At Large with Geraldo Rivera. Tonight, he is in Central Command in Doha, Qatar. I'm Lori Dew. Thank you for watching this Sunday night. Shepard Smith is back in this chair tomorrow night. Stay with Fox News.
The Fox Report, a presentation of Fox News Channel, the network America trusts for fair and balanced news.
It is 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. You are watching special war coverage on the Fox News Channel. I'm Linda Vester, live in New York. Here's the very latest on Operation Iraqi Freedom. U.S. Central Command is saying this hour about 10 coalition forces are dead in fighting in southern Iraq. There are now at least 4 American POWs in Iraqi hands. Earlier today, they were trotted out before TV cameras after they were ambushed by Iraqi forces who at first seemed to be preparing to surrender. Now, President Bush is warning the Iraqis that anyone who mistreats our prisoners of war will be treated as a war criminal. The president also commenting on the progress of the war, saying that, yes, it is going slowly, but we are achieving our goal. In the meantime, Allied ground forces now making their way toward Baghdad. They are closer than we're allowed to say at this hour. Troops are said to be within 100 miles of the Iraqi capital. We can't be more specific than that, but we're sure that you understand why. And now we have breaking news here on the Fox News Channel. U.S. troops, coalition troops, we should say, have apparently found what the UN weapons inspectors could not find, a huge chemical weapons factory. Correspondent Brett Baer has just broken this story. He's live now at the Pentagon with the details. Brett?
Hi, Linda. Senior defense officials confirmed to us tonight that coalition forces came up onto the town of An-Najaf, which is about 90 miles south of Baghdad, and they came in contact with what they're describing as a huge chemical weapons facility. Now, there is a reporter with this group as the 3rd Infantry Division. It's the 1st Brigade of the 3rd Infantry Division, Battalion 27. This reporter writes for the Jerusalem Post, and he wrote an article late today about this. Of course, we're trying to chase it all down to make sure that it was accurate information. You can tell us, here in the Pentagon, they tell us to trust the embeds. Obviously, we want to make sure that we can get the accurate information on the air as possible. I want to give you an excerpt of what this reporter wrote today in describing this. He said, one soldier was lightly wounded when a booby-trapped explosive went off as he was trying to clear the sheet metal-lined chemical weapons facility. Can we take a map of An-Najaf, please? The huge 100-acre complex, he goes on, was surrounded by an electrical fence, and he describes, and the coalition forces he's with describe it as a chemical weapons facility. There were barracks around it. It wasn't immediately clear which chemicals were being produced here, but the Iraqis tried to camouflage the facility so it could not be photographed aerially. They put sand-cast walls to make it look like the surrounding desert. After the entry into the camp this afternoon, at least 30 Iraqi soldiers and their commanding officer, the rank of general, obeyed the instructions of the U.S. soldiers, who called out from their jeep in loudspeakers for them to lie down on the ground and put their hands above their heads and to surrender, so that the U.S. and coalition forces have indeed confirmed that they are in this facility. They are in control of it, and late tonight we can confirm to you that senior defense officials are telling us that this report is accurate. We're trying to get more details on what chemicals we're talking about here, but when asked, was this a chemical weapons facility, the answer was yes. Definitively, yes. Now, of course, this comes on a very tough day for U.S. forces. There was a lot of intense fighting across the entire country, even in the south, in cities that had already been announced as surrounded and captured, essentially. U.S. forces are continuing to move to Baghdad.